Good morning, disciples, apostles, and saints. Welcome to St. Stephen's. We gather here to help one another grow in love for neighbor, self, creation, and God. We are here in love, and we're glad you're here. Now, this is a short time of reflection on the scripture reading for this Sunday. We will also be doing a deeper dive into the reading on Tuesday night on Zoom, so check out our website for more information about that. Now, I'm here once again from my porch. It's been a while since I've come to you from the porch of my house, but my son is in quarantine right now, so that means I am here with him. He is inside, and I am with you. One of the things that we want to do in this time together is first we'll tell the story so far. Then we'll talk about some of the big themes. And then we're going to talk about the big pieces that we want to make sure we cover today. So the story so far, if we recall that Jesus had come out of the wilderness. In our story, he sort of appears to be baptized by John. He then has these, he calls disciples, and he immediately goes about healing and exorcising demons. He sends his disciples out as apostles to go do the miraculous things that he does. He stills the storm. He feeds thousands of people. He exorcises 1,000 demons from a single person. So he has a lot of stuff going on. And in the middle of this, he's being confronted by a lot of, by the leadership, the religious leaders. So, sort of jumping in then to some of the themes, the sort of main themes that we've learned over the course of this time in Mark, is the frightening power of Jesus. That each, as we go along through the story, each moment, Jesus's power is alarming and frightens people, because it is beyond their expectations. And then there's another piece which is sort of in the back burner, but it's always there, which is that Jesus gave the disciples that power, that same power, and they exercise it in a few points. So as this is happening, we're, I think, I invited into imagining, participating in that power. Then there's a third motif that is very common throughout this Gospel of Mark, which is to keep it quiet. Jesus doesn't want people to talk about this. Now, in last week, we had Jesus heading north. The crowds had been suffocating. He couldn't get any time to himself, and he couldn't get even the opportunities to rest or pray or to eat, right? And so now he went north. He went far to the north outside of Hebrew territory and found himself in the territory of the Gentiles. So you have these two stories that involve healing or curing of people who are outside the Jewish camp. And it appears that something monumental has happened, both for Jesus and for the followers, that Jesus is now expanding the circle wider than he did before. So I encourage you to look into the last 2 weeks' gospel reflections to hear a little bit more about that. Now, we also get the opportunity to do something we haven't done in a while, which is the lectionary skips over a couple more pieces. So just as a means of reminding ourselves of context. We're jumping from the end, the last verses of chapter 7, to the end of chapter 8. So what we're missing is the first half of chapter 8. So there are a couple of things that happen here. One is another miraculous feeding. This is feeding of the 4,000. It feels a little bit like a repeat. It has a lot of the same elements as the feeding of the 5,000. But what's remarkable for us, just in terms of the story, is that because he's done this before, the people should be expecting that he can do it now. And yet they are once again surprised. Even his closest followers are surprised. It also has the return of another theme, which is of Jesus' sympathy for them. He has, it says, I have compassion for the crowd. So he's doing this because he feels sorry for them, or he is feeling like they need this. So there's a sacrificial character here. So after that's done, he starts to go, he goes away to the district of Dalmanutha. And on the way, the Pharisees come up to him and demand a sign, asking him for a sign from heaven to test him. And Jesus refuses, saying that's not what this is about. There's a way, this may be an interlude, right? But I do think it is. It goes beyond that. It is an opportunity to teach about what this demand for a sign is itself wrong. It's a wrong vision of the world. It is not so much about revealing the bad guys of the story as it is revealing the contrast with what Jesus is doing. Then he warns them. He warns his disciples about the yeast of Herod. Beware the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. And they misunderstand him. Much like they've sort of mistaken that feeding and sort of lost track of the fact that Jesus would be able to do that. They think he's talking about bread, talking about yeast in a physical sense. They're taking him literally again, and missing that he's saying, look at what they're trying to raise. Right? This is the dough. This is the bread they're trying to make. Beware of that bread. Beware of what they're trying to create in the world. It's an interesting moment. Then they come to Bethsaida, and Jesus cures a man of his blindness. And much like the curing of the deaf man, this one is again very physical, in which he's like spitting onto dirt and rubbing the mud into the man's eyes. It's quite a moment, and it once again has the sense of don't go yet. Your job is not to follow me. Your job is to go home. Don't spread the story yet. Just go home and be home and be yourself. It has a sort of sense, in the broader sense, that the time will come when your story will be important. And that time is not now, which is interesting. So that brings us to where we are for this week. And the gospel passage goes like this. This is where we're at. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd and his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to give the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." So, there are one of the main things to take from this is the sort of central turning point in the gospel. We're now right on what amounts to the second half, the sort of opening of the second half of the gospel. So this is the midpoint. The beginning of this passage we just read is the midpoint of the story. And so it has a literal center of the story place, and a metaphorical one. Like, this is the turning point. From here on out, now Jesus is focused on Jerusalem. So those warnings about the Pharisees, those challenges that he was getting, those sorts of elements that we were just hearing about, take on a new meaning, because it is no longer this general wandering around the countryside piece. It is now directly about that journey to Jerusalem. So in a sense, this is an important story for them. But that's not really the most exciting part, right? The most exciting part is this weird exchange between Jesus and Peter. It is about as high and low as you can get. So to sort of just recap, Jesus he gives a pop quiz to his followers, who am I? And Peter seems to give the right answer. He gives an answer that Jesus seems to reward, right? You are the Messiah. So yes, Peter says it, right? And then 5 seconds later, Jesus is calling him Satan, right? The basic, right? The sort of the story here is really significant if we recognize the physicality of what is happening. I think it awakens the heart of the story. So, essentially, if you think about how a teacher addresses students, right? The teacher stands in the sort of classic model. The teacher stands at the front of the classroom, and the students are all facing the teacher. And this is the teaching posture. And so the rabbi has two main postures. The posture in which he, in this case, he or she, is facing the students and teaching them. directly. Or he turns around and leads them on the path. So the student's job is to be behind him, physically behind their rabbi, following him where he's going. And remember, he's turned his face toward Jerusalem. So now he is heading toward Jerusalem. He is walking. Right? And the disciples' job is to be behind him. So he turns and says and asks them these questions as the teacher. Then he turns back around. Right? There's he's not so much physically, but he's telling them this is what's happening. So the first time I'm teaching you this and you're connecting and I'm asking you, I'm giving you a pop quiz, right? Now I'm telling you what's happening next. So that I'm going to turn around and we're going to start walking. What Peter does, though, is he gets out of line from behind Jesus, tries to pull him aside and speak one-to-one with him. And say, you can't do this, Jesus. You can't die. I can't let you die. And so the get behind me is truly a physical statement because Peter is literally out of line. Right? So he's out of line. Get behind me. Get back in line where you're supposed to be. You're operating outside of where you're supposed to be operating in this situation. So there's a deep rebuke of Peter's posture from teacher to student. So that's necessary. The first half is also necessary to wrap your head around, right? Which is the get behind me, Satan, right? You are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. So we remember that Satan is the adversary. So we don't think of Satan as a physical anti-God, sort of like a polar opposite of God. Think of Satan as the stumbling block, the tempter, the one who would have you go in the wrong direction. Set your mind on earthly things like power and influence and control over other people, rather than on godly things like love and generosity and peace, right? So in this sense, Peter is literally being the adversary, the tempter, the one who would have Jesus go in the wrong direction. This is the heart of this piece of the story. It is a central piece, and one that I think the more we latch onto what's happening here, the more we can understand not just the gravity of this moment, but why Jesus is speaking in those terms. Because one of the central teachings, one of the things that he teaches over and over again, and we'll hear more of here, but we hear more. It's described greater in the synoptics. Is the sense of being a stumbling block to other people, being someone standing in the way of the good things God is doing. So in that sense, it's remember back from just a couple of weeks ago, the difference between the good things and the evil things, right? The evil things that come from human tradition, not from God's command, right? God's command to love and be generous and share and support and heal and redeem. Right? That's the stuff that is of God's divine things. Right? So this, even that language, divine things, your mind not on divine things but on human things. I hope you hear in that the callback from just the other week, right? God's command and human tradition, right? The last thing, and this is the last thing to sort of wrap up the story, this conversation time, this reflection time, is to think about the expanded role of the Messiah and of the kingdom. Right? So while this dispute with Peter is so front and center in our minds. That's the most attractive and exciting part of the story. We might forget that and miss what is happening at the beginning and the end, right? And what's happening at the beginning is the establishment of what that Jesus is the Messiah. But it comes that establishment comes with a big caveat, which is he is not the kind of Messiah that you have in mind. The Messiah is not coming to conquer. The Messiah is not a military general. The Messiah is not in league with supremacy and empire. The Messiah has come to actually come and suffer on behalf of the people. Right? And it gives this whole other dimension than the one that the disciples have, and often the one from the one we often have. So this takeaway for us as we're pulling all of this stuff together is I might invite us into that space to wonder about that role of Messiah and what it means to follow and what it means to be doing what God commands, what it means to be doing not what comes from human tradition but comes from God, and ultimately what we do when that looks so different than our expectations, the expectations that have been cultivated within our community, within our families, and even our churches. What does that look like? And we're invited into thinking about a Messiah that is not here to conquer, not even here to persuade in a sort of sense of conquering another philosophy, but coming to offer his life, offer his teaching, offer his time, offer himself, that we get to participate in that and share, literally share in that power. That's a whole other ballgame. I'm so grateful you can be with us today. You are a blessing. And may you continue to bless your community. And God's grace be with you. Christ's peace be with you. The Spirit's outpouring be with you, now and always.